If you've ever looked into the eyes of someone, human or animal, and seen a quiet kind of pain that mirrors your own, then don't look away. This story is for you. It's about a boy who had forgotten how to hope, and a dog the world had given up on. Two silent hearts, both afraid, who found healing not in grand miracles, but in simply staying. Before we begin, if this kind of story speaks to something in you, gently press like, subscribe for more stories that heal in whispers not shouts, and stay with us. Because what happens next, might just mend something you didn't know was broken. The air in Clearbrook that morning was thin and sharp, the kind that whispered of early frost even though autumn had only just begun. The small town, cradled by the foothills of the Colorado Rockies, was bathed in brittle sunlight. Leaves fell like rust-colored confetti onto the cracked sidewalks, while distant peaks shimmered in quiet defiance of time. On the outskirts of town, where the road narrowed into gravel and the pine trees grew dense, sat the Willow Creek Animal Rescue Center, a modest, aging facility surrounded by wire fences and the soft hush of wind through trees. Jamie Bennett sat in the passenger seat of a silver van that had seen better days, his hands resting in his lap, unmoving. At 15, Jamie had once been the embodiment of motion, a blur of limbs and laughter on the slopes of Powder Bluff Ski Park, where he used to race down black diamond trails with reckless joy. But a year and a half ago, a fall on an icy ridge left him with a spinal cord injury that took more than his ability to walk. It took the fire out of his voice, the glint from his hazel eyes, the music from his daily rhythm. Now he moved only when necessary, spoke only when pressed, and lived mostly within the guarded silence of his own mind. Beside him, steering the van with steady hands, was his mother, Claire Bennett. Claire was in her early 40s, with short-cropped chestnut hair and a face that bore both strength and fatigue in equal measure. Years as a nurse had taught her resilience, but nothing prepared her for the quiet grief of watching her son withdraw from the world. She had been the one to suggest the visit to Willow Creek, hoping that volunteering might stir something in Jamie. He hadn't refused. But he hadn't agreed either. He simply came along, as he had with most things lately, like a leaf being carried downstream. The center smelled of wet fur, bleach, and hope barely hanging on. A tall woman in a flannel shirt approached them near the gate. Her name was Anita Solano, a volunteer coordinator in her 50s with graying black hair pulled into a low braid. She walked with a slight limp from a car accident years ago but carried herself with the kind of gentle authority that came from years of experience handling both animals and people with quiet wounds. "We're grateful for the visit," Anita said, smiling kindly at Claire before turning her gaze to Jamie. "Some of our dogs are still figuring things out. But they respond well to calm energy. No pressure." Jamie didn't reply. He only nodded once, curtly, and wheeled himself forward. The gravel crunched under his wheels as he moved slowly toward the outdoor pens. Most of the dogs barked as he passed, sharp, hopeful sounds that rose like chorus lines in a Broadway show audition. One particularly enthusiastic retriever spun in circles, trying to get his attention. Jamie glanced at them but did not stop. He didn't feel a connection. Not with wagging tails. Not with tongues lolling and eager eyes. Then his wheels came to a halt. The pen at the very end of the row was quieter than the rest. Tucked beneath a slanting pine tree, the enclosure held only one occupant, a large male German shepherd. His coat was a faded blend of tan and black, though age wasn't the cause. Scars mapped his body like lightning bolts across a battlefield. One ear stood up while the other drooped, giving him a lopsided, cautious expression. His amber eyes didn't blink as they locked on Jamie's. He didn't bark. Didn't wag. Didn't move. Just watched. "That's Echo," Anita said, appearing beside Jamie. Her voice dropped a note. 3 years old. Came to us a few months back, someone dumped him in the canyon. Probably used for illegal training. He's got signs of bite work, muzzle scars. Won't let anyone near him. Not even me." Jamie looked at Echo. The dog looked back. "He doesn't seem angry," Jamie said, surprising himself with the sound of his own voice. Anita raised an eyebrow. No. Just, haunted. Claire stepped closer. Jamie, do you want to? No, Jamie cut in, eyes still locked on Echo's. I just want to sit here. For a bit. So he did. He rolled forward, stopping a few feet from the pen's gate, and set the brakes on his chair. He didn't reach out. Didn't call the dog. He just sat, elbows on his knees, eyes steady. Echo didn't retreat. But he didn't advance either. He stood, tense, ears twitching slightly as if weighing every breath of wind. The two remained like that, boy and beast, statue and shadow, for minutes that stretched without breaking. Behind them, Anita exchanged a glance with Claire, then silently walked back toward the office, giving them space. For Jamie, time didn't feel linear in that moment. There was no past where he flew down mountains, nor future where doctors promised progress. There was only the weight of the air, the gravel beneath his wheels, and the quiet intensity of Echo's gaze. It was the first time in over a year that Jamie felt completely present, not for his pain, not for his limitations, but simply, for another being. After perhaps 15 minutes, Echo shifted. Just slightly. One paw forward. A twitch in his flank. Then, without warning, he turned and walked to the far corner of the pen, lay down, and curled in on himself, not in fear, but in resignation. Jamie exhaled. He hadn't realized he'd been holding his breath. As the wind picked up and the pine branches swayed overhead, Claire approached gently. It's getting cold, she said. We should head home. Jamie nodded, glancing once more at Echo. The dog didn't look back, but he didn't growl either. That night, as Jamie sat in his room, listening to the creak of tree limbs against the house and the slow rhythm of his mother washing dishes below, he thought of the dog. Not of his scars or silence, but of his stillness. It wasn't emptiness. It was waiting. And somewhere, deep in the marrow of his loneliness, Jamie realized something that scared him more than falling ever had. He wanted to go back. The next morning, the Bennett house stirred slowly beneath a pale sky veiled in silvery mist. Autumn in Clearbrook never rushed, it unfolded like a reluctant apology, and this particular Tuesday had a stillness to it, as though the world was holding its breath. From her spot at the kitchen counter, Claire Bennett poured herself a cup of black coffee, her short-cropped hair still damp from the shower. The quiet clink of ceramic against wood was the only sound in the kitchen until she heard the soft mechanical hum from the hallway. Jamie had woken up early. He appeared in the doorway, hair tousled, still wearing the same gray sweatshirt from the night before. His expression, as usual, was unreadable, but there was something beneath it, a low current of thought. Claire glanced up, carefully neutral. You want breakfast? Jamie shook his head. Can we go back today? She didn't ask where. She didn't need to. Of course, she said, and tried not to let the relief show in her voice. By the time they pulled into the gravel lot of Willow Creek Animal Rescue, the morning fog had lifted, revealing rows of trembling aspen trees that lined the ridge behind the shelter. Inside, dogs barked, tails thudded against chain-link fencing, and the day's routines had begun in full swing. Anita Solano was already there, clipboard in hand, her flannel rolled up at the sleeves, showing the faded sun tattoo on her forearm, a detail left over from a freer youth. In her early 50s, Anita carried the sort of calm that made nervous animals blink slower around her. A woman of mixed heritage, her roots were firmly planted in both Mexican and Southwestern traditions. She wore turquoise earrings every day, as if they were armor against chaos. Her gait still held the memory of a car accident 2 decades ago, a limp she never tried to hide. That limp, she often said, was what taught her patience. She smiled as she saw Jamie wheeling down the path toward Echo's enclosure. Back so soon? She asked. Jamie simply nodded. Anita studied his face for a moment, the stoicism, the restraint. She recognized it. It was the same look Echo had worn when he first arrived. She motioned toward the enclosure. He's in the same spot. He hasn't been interested in breakfast. Or anyone else. Jamie took his position near the fence again. This time, he was prepared. In his lap rested a paperback book, worn at the edges, the spine cracked from years of use. It was Call of the Wild, a story his father had once read to him before bed, back when bedtime meant something more than just physical rest. Echo was lying on the far side of the pen, head down between his front paws, ears tilted back. But he wasn't asleep. His eyes opened as Jamie approached, and this time, he did not lift his head. He simply watched. Jamie began to read, his voice low, steady. Not for the dog, not for anyone, just to fill the space. In the fall of 1897, a great many men were rushing into the Northland. They were going to Dawson, and the traffic. A flicker. Not a movement, but a shift, a stillness that now listened. By the third page, Echo had lifted his head. By the fifth, he had sat up. By the seventh, he was closer to the gate than before. Jamie didn't look up. He didn't dare break the unspoken agreement between them, the fragile truce of distance and presence. But Anita, watching from the office window, saw it. And she saw something else too. She stepped back into the office, where a younger woman was sorting donations. Her name was Maya Patel, 28, petite, Indian American, with a pixie cut and an irrepressible sense of optimism. She had only recently started volunteering at Willow Creek after moving from Denver, looking for quieter skies and slower rhythms after burning out in a corporate HR job. "Jamie's back," Anita said. "Yeah." Maya glanced out the window. "With the shepherd?" Anita nodded. "He's reading to him." Maya smiled. "Looks like someone's found their job." Back outside, Jamie closed the book slowly and finally looked up. Echo was now standing, closer than ever, just beyond the gate. His tail didn't wag. His ears remained tilted, alert but not aggressive. It wasn't affection. Not yet. But it was presence. And that was more than Jamie had expected. Claire stood a few feet behind, arms crossed loosely over her chest. She said nothing, letting the silence between boy and dog do the work. Jamie cleared his throat. "Do you know where he came from?" he asked, still not turning around. Anita approached slowly. "We found him about 4 months ago. In a wire cage, left in a ditch out near the county line. Took us 2 days to get him out, he wouldn't let anyone near." Jamie looked at Echo. "Why would someone do that?" Anita's voice was quiet. "He was trained, we think. Probably for something illegal. Bite work. Guarding. Maybe worse. Dogs like him are taught to see the world as a threat. And when they're no longer useful." Jamie felt something press inside his chest, a heaviness he knew too well. Being discarded. Being rewritten. Being a ghost of who you were. "He's not dangerous," Jamie said. "No," Anita agreed. "He's just scared." For the next half hour, Jamie sat. He didn't read again. He didn't move. He just stayed. And Echo, the scarred dog, the forgotten guardian, stayed too. When they finally left, Jamie didn't look back. But Claire noticed something. Echo followed them to the edge of the enclosure, one slow step at a time. The morning broke with a soft drizzle in Clearbrook, the kind that made the earth smell like memory. The clouds hung low, veiling the distant hills in gray shawls, and the streets glistened with the promise of quiet. Jamie Bennett sat beside the window, watching beads of rain chase each other down the glass. The wheelchair beneath him had become an extension of his frame, unobtrusive, silent. In his lap, the same paperback book rested, Call of the Wild, its corners curled like dried leaves. He didn't read it at home. Only at the shelter. Claire appeared at the doorway with a steaming mug in her hand. "You sure you want to go in this weather?" she asked, not unkindly. Jamie didn't look away from the window. "He'll be there." Claire nodded. "I'll warm up the van." The road to Willow Creek was darker than usual, wet gravel flinging quietly beneath the tires. As they pulled into the lot, Jamie spotted Anita standing beneath the overhang by the main entrance, clipboard tucked under her arm, wearing a rain jacket too big for her narrow frame. Her face lit up, not with surprise, but a sort of serene knowing. "He's been waiting," Anita said, as Jamie rolled down the path toward Echo's enclosure. "Didn't eat much this morning. Just paced. Then sat. Then waited." Jamie gave a small nod, wheeling toward the familiar corner of the kennel row where Echo was housed. Unlike the other dogs, who barked with excitement or whimpered for attention, Echo stood still. His ears perked slightly, his posture tense but not guarded. He had begun to associate Jamie's approach not with threat, but with stillness, and that, in Echo's world, was something sacred. Jamie positioned himself the same distance as before, 3 feet from the fence, never closer. The book sat in his lap, closed for now. The drizzle continued, tapping gently on the tin roof above the enclosures, washing over the world in hushed tones. Jamie didn't speak right away. He just looked at Echo. And Echo, for the first time, did not look through him, but at him. Across the yard, Maya Patel crouched beside a Labrador mix, coaxing it into a leash for its morning walk. Her pixie-cut hair was tucked beneath a navy beanie, and a chewed-up tennis ball poked from her coat pocket. Maya had an instinctive ease with the more excitable dogs, but Echo remained a mystery to her. She paused, watching Jamie through the mesh fence. Something about the quiet between the boy and the dog reminded her of her younger brother, Rohan, who used to calm himself during panic attacks by staring into fish tanks for hours, no words, no contact, just breath and presence. Inside the office, another staff member peeked out through the blinds. His name was Howard Lin, mid-30s, Chinese-American, stocky build, with round glasses perpetually slipping down his nose. A former vet tech turned operations manager, Howard had joined Willow Creek after a difficult divorce, drawn by the idea of starting over somewhere slower. His job was mostly paperwork and logistics, but he had been following Echo's case closely. Every day, he noted the slightest change in the dog's behavior with clinical precision, until Jamie arrived. Now, Howard found himself scribbling less and watching more. Jamie finally opened the book. His voice was soft but grounded, like water running over river stone. He had never seen dogs fight as they fought, and his first experience taught him an unforgettable lesson. As the words floated into the morning mist, Echo stepped closer. Not quickly. Not decisively. But with the hesitant grace of something remembering how to be alive. He paused near the gate, then, to Jamie's quiet astonishment, lay down. Not with his back turned. Not at a distance. But right there, just beyond the fence. His body curled but alert, his ears flicking in rhythm with Jamie's voice. His eyes, those amber wells of hurt, stared at Jamie as if listening, not just hearing. Jamie didn't smile. But he didn't look away either. Anita stood in the shadows behind the main walkway, unseen. Her hand went to her mouth as tears welled in her eyes, not loud sobs, but a tremor in her soul. She remembered the day Echo arrived, how he refused to be touched, how he growled even at her hand when all she offered was water. She had believed, for months, that the dog would never trust again. That some wounds became cages you could never break open. But now, in the quiet rain, she saw the first crack in that prison. And it had not come from discipline, or treats, or training. It had come from stillness, from presence, from a boy who spoke with no expectation. Inside the office, Howard lowered his clipboard and whispered to no one in particular, "I'll be damned." That afternoon, Jamie stayed longer than usual. He didn't read more. He simply sat. Once, he reached for the zipper of his hoodie, and Echo's ears twitched, but the dog didn't move away. Jamie paused, gave him a moment, then continued. "Hey," Jamie said softly, unsure why he was speaking. You don't have to do anything. I just like sitting here. Echo blinked slowly, his head lowering to his paws. When it was time to go, Jamie didn't say goodbye. He didn't want to disturb whatever had formed between them. But as he turned the chair and began to roll away, something happened that stopped him. A low, soft huff. Jamie turned back. Echo was standing, tail neither tucked nor wagging, just level, a signal of attention. He took one small step toward the fence and then sat down again, head tilted slightly. Jamie's voice was almost a whisper. See you tomorrow. He didn't expect an answer. But Echo stayed at the gate, eyes never leaving Jamie until the boy vanished down the path. The rain that morning was no longer a gentle mist, it came in sheets, pulled sideways by a wind that rustled pine branches and scattered golden leaves across the road like forgotten prayers. Clearbrook was hushed under the storm's weight, clouds sagging low over the rooftops. Most people stayed indoors, seeking comfort in steaming mugs and worn blankets. But Jamie Bennett was already bundled in his raincoat, hood drawn over his brown curls, and gloves pulled tight against the morning chill. Claire leaned against the kitchen counter, arms folded, watching her son adjust the footrests of his wheelchair with quiet determination. Her lips parted, hesitating on a question she'd already asked twice. You sure you want to go today? Jamie didn't look up. He's waiting. She didn't press further. Instead, she grabbed the keys from the hook and followed him out to the van, the windshield immediately peppered by the relentless downpour. On the way to Willow Creek, Jamie barely spoke, his eyes fixed on the misty road ahead. By the time they reached the center, the gravel lot had turned to soft mud, and the wind tugged at the van doors. The shelter was quieter than usual. Some of the dogs had been moved indoors, and the air smelled faintly of wet fur and disinfectant. But Echo's pen remained where it had always been, at the edge of the kennel row, closest to the woods, half sheltered by the slanted roof of the shed. Jamie rolled forward, his wheels slipping slightly in the puddles. Water clung to his sleeves and gathered in the creases of his gloves. As he approached, he noticed the corner of Echo's pen had begun to flood. The drainage system, old and poorly maintained, had clogged with leaves again, forming a shallow pool in the back of the enclosure. Echo stood with one paw lifted, unsure, his coat soaked, tail low but not tucked. He didn't bark. He didn't pace. He simply waited. Jamie reached the edge of the fence and stopped. Hey, he said softly, his breath visible in the damp air. You don't have to stay in that. Anita emerged from the main office, umbrella in hand, her long coat whipping behind her like a cape. Her face was tight with worry as she approached. We're trying to move the indoor crates around, but we're short one pen, she explained. I didn't think the water would rise this quickly. Jamie glanced at the pooling water, then back at Echo. The dog's eyes met his. Not panicked. Just unsure. I can try, Jamie said, more to himself than anyone else. Anita hesitated. We haven't opened the gate since he arrived. Not without a tranquilizer ready. You know that. Jamie's eyes didn't waver. I don't think he'll run. Anita looked at him for a long second, then slowly unlocked the outer latch. I'll be right here. Jamie wheeled closer, stopping just short of the threshold. The rain ran in streams along the path, and the gate creaked open under Anita's hand. Echo didn't flinch. He stood still, head tilted slightly, watching the boy. Jamie removed one glove and extended his hand. Not toward the dog, but palm down, resting on his lap. You can come if you want, he said gently. But only if you want. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then Echo took one step. Another. The water splashed around his paws, his body tense but not braced for fight. Jamie kept still, breath shallow. Echo stopped beside him, close enough to touch. The dog's fur dripped water, thick and matted along his ribs. Jamie didn't move right away. Then slowly, he raised his hand, trembling slightly, and let it hover just above Echo's shoulder. Echo didn't pull away. The moment stretched, thin as a thread. And then Jamie lowered his hand, gently placing it on the dog's back. The contact was light. Careful. But it held. Jamie exhaled, as if releasing something old and coiled inside his chest. "You're freezing," he said softly, fingers brushing through soaked fur. Behind them, Anita's breath caught. She turned away, blinking rain from her lashes, her throat tightening with emotion. Echo stood still. His ears twitched once. Then, almost imperceptibly, he leaned into the touch, not with weight, but with trust. Jamie let his hand remain, unmoving. "You don't have to be scared anymore," he murmured. They stayed like that, boy and dog, in the storm, unbothered by the cold or the wind. Just two souls who had learned how to survive the silence. Inside the shelter, Maya watched through the fogged window. She whispered to Howard, who stood behind her, arms crossed. He let him touch him. Howard didn't answer. He only nodded, his gaze heavy with the kind of hope that scared him. Later that afternoon, when the rain had eased and the clouds began to pull apart like frayed cotton, Echo was moved inside. Not in a crate. Not behind bars. But beside Jamie, who now visited not only with a book, but with the quiet confidence of someone who had earned something rare. Jamie helped towel the dog dry with Maya's assistance. She handed him a clean flannel and grinned. Not bad for someone who doesn't like dogs. Jamie smirked. "I like one." Echo, curled beside him on the old rubber mat, blinked sleepily. His breathing was deep, even. For the first time since he arrived at Willow Creek, he had closed his eyes in someone's presence. That night, as Claire tucked a blanket around Jamie's legs in the living room, she paused. "You okay?" she asked. Jamie nodded. "Better than okay." Then after a pause, "I think he let me in." The skies over Clearbrook had cleared, but the tension that brewed beneath them lingered like smoke after a forest fire. A week had passed since that rain-soaked day when Jamie Bennett placed his hand on Echo's back and felt the world shift, subtly, profoundly. In that moment, something ancient and fragile had begun to mend. But not all transformations are welcomed. On Monday, an article appeared in the Clearbrook Gazette. It was a small column on the back page, penned by an outsider. Dr. Vaughn Trevors, a representative of the Mountain District Canine Safety Board, had visited Willow Creek unannounced. A man in his 60s with thinning silver hair, broad shoulders, and the clipped tone of someone used to being obeyed, Dr. Trevors had made his career writing policies about dangerous dogs and high-risk breeds. He wore pressed slacks even to muddy shelters and smelled faintly of aftershave and disapproval. He'd stood outside Echo's enclosure for less than 5 minutes, made notes on a legal pad, and left without speaking to Jamie. The article was titled, "Potential Risk at Willow Creek, Untrained Youth Handles High-Risk Dog." Within a day, rumors bloomed like mold in damp corners. The kids at Jamie's old school whispered about the paralyzed dog whisperer. Parents muttered at the diner that Willow Creek was being irresponsible. Some even questioned Claire's judgment as a mother. At the grocery store, she overheard two women debating whether the shelter was putting the town in danger. "It's always the broken ones trying to fix broken things," one had said, not realizing Claire stood behind her in line. That evening, Jamie sat at the kitchen table, scrolling through the article on his phone. His jaw tightened as he read. Claire watched him from across the room, arms crossed, unsure whether to speak. "They make it sound like I forced Echo to do something," Jamie said, voice low. Claire sighed. "I think they're scared. They weren't there. They didn't see him." Jamie looked up, anger flashing. "He's not dangerous. He's just hurt. Like me." "I know." "No, you don't." The chair screeched as he pushed away from the table. "You didn't believe in him either, remember? At first, you didn't think I should go back." Claire's lips parted, but no words came. Jamie wheeled out of the kitchen, his face storm cloud dark. He didn't go to Willow Creek the next day. Or the next. On the third day, Anita noticed Echo had stopped eating. His bowl remained full in the morning. In the evening, it was untouched. Maya tried bringing in boiled chicken and liver treats. Echo sniffed once, then turned his head away. By the fourth day, Echo had begun scratching at the door of the storage room where Jamie had last sat with him. Not frantic scratches, just slow, rhythmic swipes, as though marking time. Howard watched from his office, concern etched across his usually passive face. "He's waiting," he told Anita. "I know," she replied, rubbing her temples. "But Jamie's not coming. Should we call?" Anita shook her head. "He needs to come on his own." On the fifth night, Echo refused to go into his pen. He lay outside the door, nose pointed toward the path Jamie usually rolled up on. Rain returned that evening, but he didn't move. Meanwhile, Jamie stayed in his room, the book unopened on his nightstand. He wanted to go. He needed to go. But something had twisted inside him, an old hurt sharpened by humiliation. He remembered the boys at school who once said he was useless now. He remembered the therapist who called him emotionally dependent on animals. And now, this man, this stranger, who claimed to know Echo's soul by looking at him for 5 minutes. On the 7th morning, Claire gently knocked on his door. She wore her old green jacket, the one she only put on when she meant business. "I'm going to the shelter," she said. "You can come or not." "But he's still waiting." Jamie stared at the ceiling. She didn't push. She just walked out. 20 minutes later, Jamie wheeled himself out to the van. Willow Creek was quieter than usual. A few volunteers were out walking dogs on the wet trail behind the building. Maya saw Jamie first and didn't say a word. She just smiled, nodded once, and returned to cleaning kennels. Anita was in the office, speaking to a woman Jamie hadn't seen before. The woman turned as he entered, early 40s, sharp black bob haircut, neatly pressed blazer, tablet in hand. Her name was Sarah Langford, a liaison from the county health department. She had been sent to assess the facility after Dr. Trevors's report. Sarah was the kind of woman who carried herself like a glass blade, elegant, polished, and potentially dangerous. She had once been a field nurse during a rabies outbreak in New Mexico and had since developed a no-nonsense approach to animal control. But her sharpness wasn't cruelty, it was the shape of someone who had seen too much go wrong too quickly. "Jamie Bennett," she said, extending her hand. "I've heard about you." Jamie didn't take her hand. "He's not dangerous." She tilted her head. "And you would stake your safety on that?" Jamie held her gaze. "Yes." Sarah looked at Anita. "I'd like to observe." "No interaction. Just watch." Anita hesitated, then nodded. "He's in the back. He hasn't moved much." Jamie didn't wait. He rolled down the corridor, past the pens, past the barking. When he reached the far door, he paused, hand on the latch. It creaked as it opened. Echo was lying by the threshold, head resting on his paws, body still. At the sound of the door, his ears perked. He lifted his head, blinked once. Then he stood. Jamie didn't speak. He just wheeled forward slowly. Echo padded across the room without hesitation, sat beside the wheelchair, and rested his chin lightly on Jamie's thigh. Sarah Langford, watching from the glass panel in the office door, didn't say anything for a long time. But later, as she prepared her report, she added a sentence not usually found in government forms. Subject appears bonded. Risk factors reduced by emotional stabilization. Recommend no relocation. The leaves in Clearbrook had begun to turn fire-bright by the time Anita approached Jamie with the flyer. She handed it to him without a word, letting the silence speak first. Jamie sat in the shelter's small community room, Echo lying beside his wheelchair with his head resting lightly on Jamie's shoe. It had become their ritual: read, sit, be. Words were no longer needed between them. Jamie glanced down at the paper in his hands. A simple design, bright colors. Day of Hope, Annual Fair for Children with Disabilities. October 14th, Clearbrook Park. He looked up, one brow raised. "Why are you giving me this?" Anita crouched down beside him, her movements slow from years of aching joints. "Because they're looking for therapy animals," she said, voice quiet, and Echo. Echo might be one already. Jamie let out a breath that was somewhere between a laugh and a sigh. "He's not trained." "No," she agreed. "But he knows how to listen. And sometimes that's better than training." At first, Jamie shook his head. The idea of going into a public space, being seen, being watched, it made his spine stiffen in defense. But Echo, as if sensing the storm gathering in Jamie's chest, lifted his head and pressed his nose to the boy's hand. Jamie closed his eyes. "I'll think about it," he said. The next morning, Maya found a small envelope tucked under her clipboard in the volunteer lounge. Inside was a sticky note in Jamie's handwriting. "We'll go. Just don't make it a big thing." October 14th arrived on the tail of a golden sunrise. The weather, for once, cooperated: no rain, no wind, just crisp air and the gentle warmth of autumn's sunlight streaming through the thinning canopy of maple and oak. Clearbrook Park had been transformed. Tents dotted the grassy expanse like little white sails. Booths with games, snacks, music, balloons. Children in wheelchairs, on crutches, or carried in their parents' arms moved through the crowd with wide eyes. It was not a place of pity, but celebration, a place where difference was honored, not hidden. Jamie arrived with Echo at his side, Claire trailing a few steps behind. She carried a tote bag packed with snacks, wipes, a thermos, and a change of clothes, prepared, as all mothers are, for any and every scenario. Jamie's hoodie was zipped up to his chin, hood over his hair, shoulders hunched. Echo, however, walked calmly at his side, head low but eyes alert, tail relaxed. They drew stares. Not just for the dog, but for the boy and the dog together. There was something almost cinematic in how they moved, unhurried, as if the crowd existed around them but never quite touched them. Near the center of the park, Anita stood by a booth labeled, "Quiet Zone, Meet the Therapy Animals," chatting with a petite woman with silver hair tied in a bun. The woman's name was Marjorie Blake, a retired schoolteacher turned therapy coordinator. Dressed in a hand-knit shawl and comfortable flats, she had the look of someone who had spent her life leaning down to children and listening carefully. Her voice was honey-warm, and her smile never hurried. "That must be them," Marjorie said, adjusting her glasses as Jamie and Echo approached. Anita smiled. "That's Jamie. And the quiet one is Echo." Jamie didn't speak much that morning. He didn't have to. The children came slowly, in ones and twos, some guided by parents, some by therapists. Most kept their distance. But Echo, to Jamie's mild surprise, remained perfectly still. When a child came close, he sat. When they reached out, he waited. If they flinched, he pulled back. And then she arrived. A girl of about 6, pale with dark curls and eyes that flicked from corner to corner like birds startled from branches. Her name was Lily, and she was a foster child currently living with a couple just outside of Clearbrook. Diagnosed with nonverbal autism and severe sensory processing disorder, Lily rarely allowed anyone to touch her. She wore headphones, a pink fleece jacket, and carried a small plush rabbit that was threadbare from years of squeezing. She didn't speak. Didn't laugh. Didn't cry. Until Echo approached. It happened so gently no one was sure what started it. Echo, breaking his stillness, walked toward Lily without being called. Jamie tensed, his hand tightening on the armrest of his chair. But Echo stopped 2 feet from her, sat down, and did nothing. Lily stared. Then, slowly, she stepped forward. The adults froze. She reached out one trembling hand. Echo didn't move. Her small fingers brushed his head. And then, a sound none of them expected. A giggle. High-pitched, bird-like, full of surprise and joy. Lily laughed. Then she smiled. A wide, bright, gap-toothed smile that split her face like sunlight through a window. Her foster mother burst into tears. Marjorie covered her mouth. Even Jamie blinked as if trying to register what had just happened. Lily dropped her plush rabbit and wrapped both arms around Echo's neck. Echo stayed still. Jamie looked at Anita. "He's doing better than I am." Anita wiped a tear from her cheek. "He knows what to do." Later that afternoon, when the event wound down and the booths began packing up, Jamie sat on a bench near the edge of the field, Echo curled at his feet. The sounds of laughter and chatter still filled the air, but the moment had grown softer, like a lullaby before sunset. Claire approached with a paper cup of hot cider. "You okay?" she asked. Jamie nodded. Then paused. "That girl. Lily. Do you think she'll be okay?" Claire sat beside him. "I think she already is. At least for today." They sat in silence. Echo snored lightly. And for the first time since his accident, Jamie didn't feel out of place. He felt like part of something. The following week in Clearbrook unfolded with a quiet dignity. The trees had shed most of their leaves, revealing their slender bones to the wind, and the ground wore a patchwork quilt of yellow and amber. In the small community center near the town square, a squat brick building with ivy crawling up its walls, preparations were underway for a new kind of gathering. Not a fair, not a fundraiser. This was something more intimate. It was Anita's idea. She had spent decades volunteering, speaking at schools and libraries, arranging therapy visits for trauma survivors. But rarely had she witnessed a story that resonated the way Jamie and Echo's did. So she pitched the idea to the town council, an evening event titled Echoes of Resilience, a storytelling night for youth navigating disability, fear, and healing. When Jamie heard the proposal, he froze. "Speak," he repeated, eyebrows rising. Anita nodded, her tone gentle but unwavering. "Just share what's already in you. Nothing more." Claire was the one who convinced him to say yes. They were at home, Jamie absently spinning the wheels of his chair back and forth in the hallway while Echo slept curled up nearby. Claire leaned in the doorway, arms crossed over her chest, her voice soft but firm. "You don't have to teach anyone, Jamie," she said. "You just have to let them know they're not alone." Jamie looked at Echo, then back at his mother. "I'm not a hero," he muttered. Claire smiled, brushing a hand through his curls. "That's why they'll believe you." The evening arrived under a sky of deep violet. Inside the community center, rows of folding chairs had been arranged before a small stage framed by twinkle lights. A modest podium stood in the center, and above it, a hand-painted sign read, "Stories that hold us." Attendees trickled in, teachers, shelter volunteers, local families. Some were parents of children who had been at the Day of Hope. Others had heard rumors of the boy and his dog and simply wanted to witness something true. Jamie sat backstage, heart hammering like a fist against his ribs. He wore a navy button-up, slightly wrinkled at the sleeves, and dark jeans. Echo lay beside him, calm as ever, occasionally glancing up at the sound of distant footsteps. Anita stood nearby, flipping through her clipboard. Then came a voice, smooth, familiar. "You look nervous." Jamie turned to see Sarah Langford, the county health officer who had once evaluated Echo. Tonight, she wore a soft gray coat over a black sweater, her dark bob tucked neatly behind one ear. Her sharp edges seemed softened by the evening. "I'm just hoping I don't throw up in front of everyone," Jamie said dryly. Sarah smiled faintly. "You'll be fine. And if you do, they'll still listen." He gave her a weak laugh. "You came." She nodded. "Couldn't miss it." And I brought someone. She stepped aside, revealing a boy about 10, with sandy hair and a wiry build. He stood awkwardly behind her, one hand on her coat. His name was Eli, her nephew, newly diagnosed with mild cerebral palsy. Jamie caught the boy's shy glance toward Echo, and without thinking, gestured him over. "This is Echo," he said simply. Eli took a hesitant step, then another. Echo rose slowly, tail swaying. The boy knelt and pressed a hand into the thick fur at Echo's neck. No words. Just breath. Just closeness. A bell rang. The lights dimmed. Jamie rolled out onto the stage. At first, the silence roared. He felt every eye on him like heat. But then Echo padded beside him, sat down at the base of the podium, and lay down, his chin on his paws. Just like always. And suddenly, Jamie remembered, it wasn't about being ready. It was about being real. He looked out at the crowd. "My name is Jamie Bennett," he began, voice low but steady. "And this is Echo. We met at a time when both of us were scared of the world. I couldn't walk anymore, and he didn't want to be touched. I didn't save him. And he didn't save me. We just didn't run away from each other. And sometimes," he paused, letting the silence breathe. "That's enough." There was no applause yet. Just stillness. Jamie continued, his voice gaining weight. He told them about the first visit to Willow Creek, about the scratched gate and the untouched food bowls. About the rain, the trembling paw steps, the moment he laid a hand on Echo's back. He spoke about Lily, about her laughter, and the warmth it stirred in a place he'd thought was frozen. Then, he said something that quieted even the smallest rustle in the crowd. "People talk about healing like it's this grand transformation. Like one day you're broken, and the next, you're whole. But it's not like that. It's slower. It's smaller. It's two scared creatures choosing not to run. Again and again." He looked down at Echo. "And that is where real courage begins." The room was silent. Then someone exhaled audibly. A woman wiped her eyes. In the back row, Sarah rested a hand on Eli's shoulder. Jamie smiled slightly. "I guess what I want to say is, let the wounded see each other. Let them know they're not the only ones carrying invisible things. We don't need to be perfect. We just need to stay." A pause. Then, rising like morning light, the applause began, not thunderous, but deep. Respectful. Heartfelt. Backstage, Anita hugged Jamie tightly. "You did more than speak," she whispered. "You reached them." That night, after everyone left and the chairs were stacked away, Jamie and Echo sat alone on the stage. The twinkle lights above flickered in the growing dark. Echo let out a deep sigh and rested his head on Jamie's foot. Jamie ran his fingers through the thick fur and whispered, "You did good." The first snowfall came earlier than usual to Clearbrook. One morning in late November, the town awoke to a soft hush blanketing rooftops, tree limbs, and every crack in the sidewalks. It was a gentle snow, the kind that drifted more than it fell, feather-like, slow, like the sky was exhaling something it had held in for too long. For years, Jamie Bennett had met the cold with dread. But this year, as he watched it fall from his bedroom window, something inside him was still, and warm. 2 weeks had passed since the storytelling night. In that time, something shifted in how people looked at Jamie. Not with pity, not with awe, but with respect. Echo had become something of a quiet legend around town. Parents asked if their children could meet him. Therapists called Anita to schedule visits. And Claire, who once feared Jamie might never step back into the world, now found herself packing more snacks, writing down more addresses, adjusting to the rhythm of her son's steady return. At Willow Creek, change was happening too. A board meeting had been called, the kind that usually passed without much spark. But this time, Anita stood at the head of the table, wearing her good denim shirt and turquoise necklace, hands folded with purpose. Beside her was Howard Lynn, glasses sliding down his nose as usual, holding a large binder labeled, Echo Haven Proposal. They proposed a new section of the shelter grounds, a quiet zone with soft lighting, heated pens, and open green space. It would be for the dogs no one else wanted. The ones who didn't wag, who didn't fetch, who flinched at hands and sounds. A place for healing, not just housing. And they would name it after the one who taught them how to begin. Echo Haven. Some on the board were hesitant. The budget was tight. The town small. But Sarah Langford stood up from her seat that night, still dressed in her city black coat and sensible heels, and spoke plainly, "We don't just rescue dogs to find them homes. We rescue them because the way we treat the vulnerable defines who we are." The motion passed. Unanimously. 1 week later, Anita called Jamie. "You're not going to just sit in the background for this," she said. Jamie blinked. "What do you mean?" "I mean I want you to help us design the program. How it works. Who we accept. What the daily routines will be. You know what these dogs need. You've been one of them." Jamie hesitated. "I'm not qualified," he said. Anita chuckled on the other end. "Neither is Echo. But you both seem to be doing just fine." On the first day of snow, Jamie visited the site of Echo Haven. It wasn't much yet, just a fenced-off patch behind the main shelter, with a few wooden beams, a gravel path waiting to be paved, and a bench under a sycamore that had already shed its leaves. But it had possibility. Echo ran ahead, nose buried in snowbanks, tail rising like a flag of quiet victory. His coat had thickened for the winter, and his old scars, though still visible, looked more like reminders now than wounds. A new volunteer walked beside Jamie, a teenage girl named Harper Lee, 17, with frizzy auburn curls, chipped blue nail polish, and a quiet presence. She was a transfer student from Wyoming, drawn to the town by a scholarship for visual arts and a need to escape her previous school's cruelty. Her voice was low and clipped, her gaze wary of compliments, but she had taken a particular liking to Echo from the start. "They asked me to paint the sign," Harper said, pulling a folded sketch from her coat pocket. It showed the words Echo Haven in curved, weathered script, nestled among mountains and trees, with the silhouette of a German shepherd lying beside a boy in a wheelchair, both looking toward the horizon. Jamie looked at it for a long moment. "It's perfect." Harper didn't smile, not fully. But she nodded, and that was enough. They reached the bench, and Jamie pulled a book from his bag, an anthology of short stories. Echo settled beside him, head eventually dropping onto Jamie's leg. Snow began to fall again, light and drifting, catching in Jamie's hair, on Echo's ears. No one spoke. There was no need. From across the yard, Anita and Maya watched through the foggy office window. Maya had brought homemade cookies, and Anita sipped tea from her old thermos. They didn't interrupt. Howard, pacing behind them, muttered, "I'll finish the new pen layouts tonight. But I still think we need heated flooring." Maya grinned. "You're secretly the softest of all of us, you know." Howard snorted. "Tell anyone, and I'll deny it." At sunset, Claire drove up the gravel path, bringing 2 more blankets and Echo's winter boots, which Jamie always forgot. She stood at the edge of the field, watching her son with his book, the dog at his feet, and the snow falling gently around them like a story that didn't need to be told aloud. Jamie looked up when she approached. "It's not so cold today," he said. Claire smiled. "You've changed." Jamie nodded. "So has Echo." He looked down at the dog, gently snoring now, lips twitching in a dream. "You know," Jamie said quietly, "for a long time, I thought healing meant going back to who I was. But I think, maybe it means becoming someone new. And letting that be enough." Claire placed a hand on his shoulder, steady, warm. Together, they sat as the light faded, and snow painted the field in shades of silver and silence. Echo stirred slightly, opened one eye, then nestled closer. And for the first time in years, Jamie didn't dread the winter. Because winter had brought Echo. And this winter, it wasn't cold at all. Sometimes, the miracles we pray for don't arrive with lightning or loud applause. Sometimes, they come as a wounded dog who quietly chooses to trust again, or as a boy who learns to love a life he never expected. Echo didn't need to be perfect to be loved. And neither do we. In a world that often rushes past pain, stories like this remind us to slow down, and see the beauty in healing that takes its time. Maybe that's what God's grace really looks like, not in sudden change, but in the quiet persistence of hope. In the way broken hearts find one another. And stay. If this story touched you, share it with someone who might need it. Subscribe to our channel for more stories that carry light in the dark. Leave us a comment below, tell us how this journey made you feel. And if your heart was moved today, write Amen in the comments. May God bless you, and may you always recognize the quiet miracles walking right beside you.